Well, guys, we are on the precipice of finally doing this thing. Voltaire, on chain governance, liquid democracy. And when we finally ratify that constitution, believe it or not, it's going to be a whole new type of nation state. If the only type of nation state you care about right now is one where the current administration, the Dragon, and Gensler aren't running crypto policy, or if you're finding value in these videos, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. It has been a second since the last time we talked, and that has been because I have been fiat mining like crazy so I could DCA as much money as possible into Cardano. It's the whole reason I'm doing this. I would much rather be making these videos all the time, but the best way for me to get as much fiat into Cardano as possible before things get crazy in this cycle has been for me to go back deep underground into the fiat mines, shoveling shoveling away, trying to mine little bits of fiat here and there out of the system so I can then reallocate them into my Cardano DCA. This is not my first crypto cycle. I've been doing this since that whole 2013, 2014 time period. I've seen these cycles begin and end before. I know what's happened in the past, and that's the only prediction I can make for what's going to happen in this cycle. Given all that, and as always, none of the things I say are advice of any kind, financial or otherwise. But myself, because I've seen this cycle happen several times already, I'm doing what I always wished I had done at the end of every cycle, and that's put more money into crypto. So I'm deep in the fiat mines, mining away, trying to DCA as much as possible into Cardano because Cardano is obviously my bet. It's my big crypto bet, and for good reason. And we've talked throughout these videos. We're approaching 700 Cardano videos here, 700 Cardano rumor rundowns. And throughout those videos, what I've tried to focus on is not all this silly Fibonacci price stuff that is the main fodder of most of the rest of crypto YouTube. That's the big easy thing that all crypto YouTubers can do. Pull up the chart and give you the Fibonaccios. That's what they love to do because it's a very effective way of pushing those buttons in your brain that give you that feeling of hope, elation, contentedness, all of those good kind of feelings. The Fibonaccios are good for pushing those buttons in your brain and getting you to watch the videos. Instead of doing that, though, which is the easy way, instead of doing that, what I try to focus on is the merits, the relative merits of the blockchain that I think is the best, which is the Cardano blockchain. It would also be better, it would be easier and better to do what most other YouTubers do, and that's sort of just don't be a partisan of any particular blockchain, just cover whatever is hot. Whatever people like to watch at the moment, just cover that, regardless of what blockchain it is, regardless of what trend it is. If NFTs are hot, cover NFTs. If meme coins are hot, cover meme coins, whatever brings the views. I'm also not doing that. That would be a better way to get views, which is why most YouTubers just kind of do that. You know, they all have their favorite blockchains, but they mainly just cover whatever is getting the views in crypto YouTube. Instead of doing that, what I've tried to do is talk about, analyze, and discuss the relative merits of the various blockchains with a focus, as always, on my favorite blockchain, Cardano. And one of the reasons it's been my favorite, there are a lot of technical reasons which we've covered over these near 700 videos. But another one of the big reasons is that Cardano has tried to do the most ambitious thing you can possibly do in the crypto world. And that's go in the direction of actual on-chain governance, giving the blockchain back to the people. And the reason why this is almost never done in crypto, I mean, we've had some poor attempts at it, like EOS. EOS was an incredibly ambitious attempt at governance. They did that crazy $4 billion ICO back in the day, and it was a big mainstream blockchain. It was a giant blockchain that got a lot of attention, and then they unveiled this whole governance thing, and it was extremely ambitious. It had this huge human component where there were like EOS courts involved, and there were going to be like basically these EOS judges, people from the EOS community were going to be like settling disputes. Maybe you want to call it arbitration, mediation, whatever, but they're basically going to have this like almost judicial component to their governance. They did it wrong. That was too ambitious. It was the wrong type of governance for blockchains. Why? A lot of different reasons, but maybe the biggest one, because if you sued someone in EOS court and then they sued you in real court was going to be the one that mattered, not the fake EOS court. So so they did that. They did it the wrong way. We've had big attempts at governance that did it the wrong way. And we've had a lot of other attempts at governance. And then we've had a lot of blockchains who looked at the whole notion of governance and said, that's too hard. We're not going to touch that. I think we all know we're talking about blockchains like Ethereum, like Bitcoin. They have chosen not to pursue governance at all, also for a lot of different reasons. It's too hard. It's really hard to do governance correctly. It's really easy to screw it up. It's really hard to do it correctly. And B, because the people who are running things would have to give up power. That's the other reason. If you are this kind of like ivory tower crypto philosopher who just kind of writes blog posts and then your whole community, discusses those blog posts, and largely goes in the direction that you kind of want them to, that you express in your blog posts, it's a pretty good way to be. It's the best of all worlds because you get to sort of help mold the direction of your blockchain. But then if things go wrong, you can say, oh, that's not really what I meant. The way you executed that was not quite right. Really, it should be this slight modification, this other thing. It's great you guys tried that, but we've now figured that doesn't work. We should actually go in this other direction. It's the best of both worlds because you're not really held to account for any kind of poor execution. And yet you get to sit around and philosophize about the best direction for the blockchain. People don't want to give that up. People want to keep doing that. They want to keep writing blog posts and basically de facto being in charge, but not really being held to account for, you know, all the minutia, all the, execution timelines. So people don't want to go in the direction of governance for that reason too. They'd rather just be a core dev, be this philosopher figure, those being two different things often, but they'd rather be one of those two, and kind of informally run everything without formally having to take responsibility. That's a lot better, a lot easier if you're that central figure. But you know what's actually better? Giving up that power and giving the ecosystem to the community. Almost no leader of a blockchain wants to do that because generally with humans, no leader actually wants to give up power. And just by coincidence, this particular Cardano rumor rundown is coming out on the day when exactly that happened in the United States. Joe Biden decided not to run for president today as I record. We're not going to talk about all that. We could do many, many hours of discussion of what's going on in US politics, but this is the Cardano rumor rundown. So we're not going to talk about that. Instead, we're going to talk about what's going to happen in Cardano governance, which is also extremely fascinating because the community is going to take control of the entire damn ecosystem because the people in charge, IOHK, now called IOG, the Cardano Foundation, and Emergo, they all decided this is actually what's best for Cardano. Charles Hoskinson, from the very start, has said, I'm going to give up the reins. I'm going to leave you, the community, in charge. I'm going to walk away. And he's not really going to walk away. I mean, I think we all realize he's going to be around. And in fact, he'll even be on the Interim Constitutional Committee as a member, as the leader of IOG, along with Emergo and the Cardano Foundation. and the other groups we have elected to be members of the Interim Constitutional Committee. So the the interesting thing, though, if you just knew that part, is that you would assume that they would hold those positions forever. Not the case. As we've previously covered when we first covered SIP 1694, which is the Cardano improvement proposal, which will basically execute the whole Voltaire strategy. What we've previously discussed is that the DREPs and the SPOs can vote out the Constitutional Committee. So not only has IOG and Emergo and the Cardano Foundation given up power and relegated themselves to the Constitutional Committee, but they've even specifically made it so that they can be voted out through that vote of no confidence. We covered all those mechanisms in the SIP 1694 Voltaire video that I previously did. Just go ahead and Google that video if you're not familiar with how all that works. We're not going to cover that again. We'd just be re-summarizing that in this video if we did that. Instead, we're going to cover the actual Constitution. The Constitution, this is the interim Constitution. This is what IOG has been calling minimum viable governance. Obviously, this is a play on the term minimum viable product. You know, when a tech company comes out and they say, okay, here is a version of this product that we've been talking about launching, and it's not ultimately what we want it to be. It's not all polished and perfect. There are going to be problems and flaws and mistakes and errors, but this will minimally do what we set out to do. This will give you sort of a minimum version of this product. This is the minimum viable governance version of Cardano governance. And I actually think it's pretty good. As we go through this Constitution, there are a lot of parts of this Constitution where I read it and I thought to myself, this was written by a person with not not all of the legal training that like an attorney would have. It's obvious some parts of this were written by people that didn't have legal training, which is probably good because we're not trying to recreate in real life an in real life legal system. We're trying to create something new, something different. So it makes sense that this wasn't written 100% by attorneys or people with legal training. This is written by crypto people. And I'm sure there was a lot of legal input. I can tell by the way, by how well it's structured, surely there was a lot of legal input into this document and a lot of research and a lot of studying. You can tell as you go through this document, a lot of time was put into figuring out how to do this whole blockchain on-chain governance thing correctly. A lot of time was put into this. There are some sections where I look at it and I think to myself, okay, a, a, a decently tricky lawyer could argue this in a multitude of conflicting ways, but this is minimum viable governance. This is not going to be perfect governance. There are going to be a lot of things about this that are going to change. There are going to be a lot of things that are going to have to be interpreted in various ways. They'll have to be modified. There's going to be this whole process. But it was the same with the US Constitution, which is the example I'm going to use. There are other documents we could cite from other jurisdictions around the world. But when I think about the US Constitution, the great thing about it was that it was written in language that even today people can read and understand because it wasn't written in the most highly technical legal terms. I mean, they could have had the sort of legal scholars of the day write it using a whole bunch of legal terms in Latin. That might have been the most technical way they could have written that document, but no one would have read it over the years. No layperson would have read it over the years and understood what was going on. People wouldn't be able to read it today and understand what was going on. Instead, they wrote it in straightforward vernacular that pretty much everybody can understand. This document was written the same way, and I'm glad it was. I'm glad it wasn't written in legalese. I'm glad it was written in a vernacular that everybody can understand. This is the right way to do this. I'll admit it, I'm a little bit surprised how well done all of this seems to be. There are things I would change. There are things that are going to have to change. There are things that, you know, are going to evolve in the future, but this is actually very well done, I think. So, the first thing is they didn't make the EOS mistake. They didn't try to do the whole code is law and we're going to have courts and jurisprudence and arbitration and conflict resolution. They didn't try to do that. They just tried to do the parts of running a blockchain that can be done on chain. This was a brilliant limitation. I think limiting themselves to that was the first brilliant move made in the construction of this Cardano interim constitution. So let's get down to business. What is in this document? So you've got an intro, a preamble, Article 1, ecosystem principles, Article 2, community, 3, governance, 4, DREPs, 5, SPOs, 6, constitutional committee, 7, amendments, 8, interim period, and then you've got 2 appendices. The first appendices is guardrails. Appendix 2 is ratification. So the good news is there wasn't anything in here that was too surprising to me. That's good. I like what it does. It's a very bare bones document that just sort of gives you enough detail to get us through this interim period until we ratify the Constitution and governance is in full swing with DREPs there ready to vote on everything, the SPOs there and ready, and the Constitutional Committee there and ready to vote on the constitutionality of things. And this is an important point. What is the Constitutional Committee going to do? They're going to compare new proposed policies to this Constitution, or this is the interim Constitution, but eventually to the final ratified Constitution, and just be the safeguard that lets the Cardano community know if something is not consistent with the Constitution. So this is important to remember. This is not a bicameral system with a House of Representatives and a Senate where they're both sort of, you know, lawmaking institutions with very similar duties. The Constitutional Committee is in charge of making sure new policies that are proposed are consistent with the Constitution. Then you've got the delegated representatives who are voting on policies, and you've got the SPOs who are also, you know, acting on policy. We covered all of that in the SIP 1694 video. So if you still have questions about that, go back, like I said, go back and review that video. But let's talk a little bit about the intro here. They say some interesting things that are important to keep in mind. They say this is a minimum viable constitution, like we covered. The final constitution must be ratified by ADA holders. This interim version, contains such provisions and guardrails as are necessary for SIP 1694 to come into effect. It is intended to be temporary. Ratification of the Constitution is expected to occur at the end of 2024 or the beginning of 2025. During 2024, a series of workshops will be held around the world. We know that. Additionally, the final constitution will require the approval of ADA holders before coming into effect. Such approval is expected to occur in the beginning of 2025. However, given that on-chain governance will come into existence during 2024, requiring a robust constitution and constitutional committee before the final constitution has been ratified, this interim constitution must contain such provisions and guardrails as are necessary to support and give effect to the needs and requirements of SIP 1694. In approaching this interim constitution, it must be remembered that this is not a constitution for only a blockchain, but rather it is a constitution for a blockchain ecosystem. Moving on to the preamble is exactly what you expect. A lot of aspirational language, and it's well written. It says that the Cardano blockchain ecosystem has expanded significantly, comprised of thousands of ADA holders, individuals, builders, developers, enterprises, stake pools, users of Cardano blockchain, and others, and talks about why we need a little bit of governance here. Then we have blockchain ecosystem principles in Article 1. Through adopting a constitution, the ecosystem shall establish a robust governance framework. shall be governed on a vote-based decision-making model, fostering inclusivity, a diversity of views, innovation, and adaptability. The Cardano blockchain shall operate in accordance with the Cardano blockchain guardrails as set forth in the guardrails appendix to this interim constitution. Article 2, the community, no formal membership shall be required to use, participate in, and benefit from the Cardano blockchain. That's good. It needs to be permissionless. Instead, all ADA holders, all developers of, all those building on, and all those otherwise supporting, maintaining, or using the Cardano blockchain are beneficiaries of the ecosystem, and as such are collectively members of the Cardano community. So this is telling you who is the Cardano community, all of those individuals, and they shall all be beneficiaries of this constitution, entitled to its rights, privileges, and protections, and as such are expected to support and uphold this interim constitution. That's you. You're expected to support and uphold this constitution if it is ratified, if you ratify it. Members of the Cardano community who hold ADA are entitled to access and participate in the on-chain decision-making processes. I would hope so. Members of the community have a responsibility to maintain the integrity of the ecosystem. Okay. Participatory governance. This explains that there are going to be these three bodies, basically taking you through some of the SIP 1694 ideas. We're going to have DREPs, SPOs, and the Constitutional Committee. Delegated representatives. Now they're going to go through and tell you all about DREPs. They're going to tell you about the role of the SPOs. They're going to tell you about the Constitutional Committee. And here, as I alluded to earlier, the Constitutional Committee will be the part of the governance process that ensures governance actions are consistent with the interim constitution. There you have more information about the Constitution. Amendments to this Constitution, including to the guardrails, shall be approved by a collective decision-making process requiring an on-chain governance action satisfying the applicable threshold. They tell you about the interim period. The interim period shall be a temporary period that shall continue until such date that the final Constitution has been ratified. And then we get into the guardrails. So you can see it's pretty bare bones. It's pretty bare bones. It basically takes you through, a bunch of aspirational language as to why we need governance, why governance is a good idea, what kind of governance we're going to try to have, who's a part of the community, what are the three chambers of the government, DREPs, Constitutional Committee, and SPOs. And then it's right into the guardrails. And the guardrails cover a whole bunch of different things. And this is the section that you can tell is very heavily crypto. So it covers things like critical protocol parameters. It covers things like economic parameters. It covers things like, what are the next parameters? Like under economic parameters, the monetary expansion rate, something that is very important for all of us in Cardano, because part of the whole hard money crypto ethos thing is that we have a predictable monetary policy. And most important piece of monetary policy is the monetary expansion rate. So it gives you these guardrails. The guardrails look like this. They're like, hey, monetary expansion must not exceed 0.005, must not be lower than 0.001. That means there will be monetary expansion, and must not be negative. We're not going to be burning ADA. Then they have network parameters, core metrics, things like block propagation, the block propagation delay profile that will be informing parameter changes. Things like traffic volume, block propagation delays, diffusion benchmark. They talk about changes to specific network parameters, block body size, transaction size, memory unit limits, a lot of the CPU unit limits, a lot of the things we've talked about over the last, 692 videos, all these things that have been debated many, many times in the Cardano community. Here's where we're laying out actual values for a lot of these kinds of things. Next up, technical and security parameters. like the target number of stake pools. Here you'll see must not exceed 2,000, must not be lower than 250, must not be negative, must not be zero. So you can see this is very sort of crypto oriented, all these things. Pool pledge influence, something that has been debated quite vigorously in the SPO community. Pool retirement window, a little bit more mundane, not quite as controversial. Maximum number of collateral inputs, Plutus cost models. So there are a lot of very technical parameters, and there are guardrails for those things, so that the interim government doesn't accidentally change a parameter, vote to change a parameter that would cripple our blockchain. So I think it's important to have these in place because these things require a certain amount of technical expertise. And just because somebody decides they want to change something and maybe they're very charismatic and they get a lot of votes, doesn't mean it's a good idea to change that thing. But then we come to governance parameters and we get things like deposits for governance actions. And this is a very wide open parameter. Must not be less than 1 ADA, must not be more than 10 million ADA. Of course, if you're like me, you're going to push for lower amounts, but we have to have some ability to stop people from spamming governance actions. So we need to have some kind of a deposit there. Then you've got deposits for DREPs. Again, very wide open, between 1 and 100,000 ADA. But again, you want to hit a manageable number of DREPs and not have, billions of DREPs, because there is no cost associated with that. I know a lot of this probably seems pretty mundane, but just like in a lot of sports, rules make the game. And in governance, rules always end up being very, very important. Like this one, maximum constitutional committee term. So, how long can the constitutional committee be in there? And we've got some bounds. It can't be zero, it can't be negative, must not be less than 18 epochs. That's 90 days or 3 months. Cannot be more than 4 years. So these are just guardrails. So eventually we can decide how long we want this to be. And the guardrails are, hey, not less than 3 months, but also not more than 4 years. And then we've got earlier in this interim constitutional committee, they say there will be must not type guardrails, and there will also be should and should not guardrails, and they might overlap. So they're laying out a bunch of sort of hard bounds and suggested bounds. So here the hard bound is not more than 4 years, but then they're also saying there's a should guardrail, and they say it should not be more than 3 years. So they're suggesting 3 years here, but we get to decide. It's our governance. The minimum size of the Constitutional Committee must not be less than 3, must not be more than 10. So pretty wide open. I mean, they haven't been too prescriptive here. I think they've left things pretty wide open for us. Then we come down to Treasury withdrawal actions. This is going to be a pretty important area because the main thing with governance, just like with governance in the real world, is deciding who gets the money controlled by the government. That is the biggest thing, basically the biggest thing in governance, even in the real world. Who gets all the money, and withdrawal actions are going to be how that happens. Hard fork initiation actions. This will also be very important. Whole section on hard fork initiation actions. Updating the Constitutional Committee, updating the Constitution, or proposing policy actions. Then we've got guardrails on no confidence actions. And remember, basically the DREPs and the SPOs can get together and vote no confidence on the Constitutional Committee. The Constitutional Committee either has to be in a state of confidence or no confidence. It's a bit like a parliamentary system when you vote no confidence in the current government. info actions, and then we have guardrails during the interim period. And this is the section of the guardrails that'll probably be most important for the very immediate future. This lays out what happens after the Chang hard fork. It says the interim period begins with the Chang hard fork and ends after a community ratified financial or final constitution. So the Chang hard fork, we know from interviews that Charles has given that what's going to happen is we're going to try to reach a percentage of the D reps having adopted node 9.0. So the minimum node that can pass the hard fork boundary, that is the current node that is already out there. Once we get past a minimum threshold of stake pools having adopted that, then something like, I believe it's 30 days later, we get the Chang hard fork. Once we get the Chain hard fork, the following things will happen. An interim period technical rollout. The Chain hard fork will enable 3 initial SIP 1694 governance actions. Those are info, hard fork initiation, and protocol parameter change actions. ADA holders will be able to register as and delegate to DREPs immediately after the hard fork, but as described in SIP 1694, DREP voting will not be available except on info actions. This ensures that ADA holders have sufficient time to choose their voting delegations. SPOs will vote as described in SIP 1694 hard fork initiation, and protocol parameter changes actions will also be ratified by the Constitutional Committee. ADA holders will be able to withdraw their staking rewards as usual. A subsequent hard fork ratified by the Constitutional Committee and SPOs shortly after the Chang hard fork will enable the 4 remaining SIP 1694 governance actions: treasury withdrawals, motion of no confidence, update Constitutional Committee and or threshold and or terms, and update the Constitution or proposal policy. At this point, DREP voting will be enabled, and staking rewards can only be withdrawn if the ALA holder has delegated their vote, including the predefined abstain, no confidence voting options. So that last part is going to freak some people out, because you can tell by the time we get this subsequent hard fork, we're basically in this full-on governance mode, and the Constitution can be updated, proposals can be proposed, motions of no confidence in the Constitutional Committee can be proposed, and people are a little freaked out about this last part that says basically you can't withdraw your staking rewards in Cardano unless you have delegated your vote. But hey, to withdraw your rewards, you have to push a few buttons, either on your hardware wallet and via your software interface, or just via your software wallet. This just adds, hey, once this goes live, you need to delegate to a DREP, or just say you're abstaining from votes, or you can choose the no confidence voting option. So you can just abstain from voting. If you don't want to do anything, if you don't care about Cardano governance, you just want to get your rewards like normal, you're not really prevented from doing that. You got to push a few buttons to get your rewards every time anyways. Here, you just have to hit that abstain button. So you have to choose to abstain if that's what you're going to do, or delegate to a DREP, which is probably the better thing. If you don't want to be a DREP yourself, you should probably delegate to a DREP and, choose someone whose vision of the future of Cardano you agree with. So here down below, we have some more detail. To provide sufficient time for DREPs to register and campaign if RAID holders choose their initial voting delegations, at least 18 epochs, 90 days must elapse after the Chang hard fork before the subsequent hard fork can be ratified. Once the subsequent hard fork is enacted, DREP voting can occur as described in SIP 1694. Treasury withdrawals must not be ratified until there is a community-approved Cardano blockchain ecosystem budget in effect. So there has to be a budget in effect before people can start proposing that they get money. Treasury withdrawals must be consistent with the budget. ADA holders must have ratified the final constitution as specified in Appendix 2 before ratifying any other proposed update to the Constitution or update to the Constitutional Committee or motion of no confidence. Update to the proposal policy actions that are consistent with the interim constitution may be ratified during the interim period, provided the interim constitution itself is not changed. So then we have a list of protocol parameter groups. This is just a way to organize the different protocol parameters. And then we got this final section, and this is the final section of the whole interim constitution on ratification. It says, a series of global workshops for data holders to discuss and debate the Articles of Final Constitution will commence during the second half of 2024. Workshops shall be geographically distributed. Workshops shall elect up to a total of 100 delegates, comprising up to 50 voting delegates and up to 50 non-voting alternate delegates who shall participate in a constitutional convention. So there you go. These geographically distributed workshops shall elect 50 voters at the constitutional convention and 50 alternates. Each voting delegate shall have an equal vote. The Constitutional Convention shall be held no later than the end of 2024. Very ambitious, but it looks like we're finishing this whole thing this year. The final Constitution shall be approved at the Constitutional Convention, where delegates elected to attend the Constitutional Convention shall agree to the final Constitution with such amendments as they deem appropriate and necessary. The final Constitution, as approved at the Constitutional Convention, shall be submitted as a governance action in accordance with SIP 1694 no later than January 31st, 2025. So there you go. The Constitutional Convention itself shall happen before the end of 2024. Then the Constitution that's approved at that Constitutional Convention shall be sent to the entire ecosystem. It'll be approved at the convention, and then it shall be submitted as an actual governance action in accordance with SIP 1694 sometime in 2025. So we're going to get a constitutional convention this year, and then as a whole ecosystem, all ADA holders are going to ratify that in 2025. This is not a bad system. They could have easily made this way overly complicated and had like 700 pages of text that no one would read. This is a bare bones, minimum viable governance system. And I think they hit it perfect in terms of fleshing things out and not overdoing it so that nobody actually reads it. We just went through the entire interim constitution in this one video. You basically now have all of the big major details. There's a lot more in here. I highly recommend you read it if you're interested in those details, but those are the highlights. I think this is the beginning of something very, very good, not just for Cardano, but for all of crypto. If all of crypto, if every single ecosystem did exactly this, crypto would look very, very different. I think crypto would probably be going in a much better direction if every ecosystem came up with some form of governance that was comparable to this. I think this is going to be a big step forward for crypto generally, but especially for us in Cardano. We're kind of at the vanguard of this whole thing that should be happening throughout all of crypto. And it really is sort of the birth of something that could become a new type of nation state. Think about it, and we've talked about this in videos before, all throughout sort of the history of the 600 and I think it's 92 videos that have comprised the Cardano Rumor Rundown. I think crypto is always headed toward an alternate means of organizing humans and economic activity. The whole nation state model, I think it's a very good model, but it's not a very equal playing field for all the economic actors of the world. Maybe crypto can be that more equal, that more level playing field for all the different economic actors who are involved in the global economy. And that doesn't mean it's not going to be capitalistic. That doesn't mean that you can't equally be a patriot of your nation state. It just means that there's going to be some economic activity going on in this alternate system. And you might end up having a lot of your own economic activity happening inside a crypto ecosystem like Cardano. And if most of your economic activity is eventually happening inside the Cardano blockchain ecosystem, and most of your assets live on the Cardano blockchain, then it does start looking a lot more like a nation state, a different type of nation state than it does what we think of blockchains being in 2024. I'm very optimistic. I'm excited for what's going to happen in the rest of 2024. Even more excited for this moment in 2025 when we all ratify the Cardano Constitution together. I don't think the rest of crypto has any inkling of how far ahead we are in this. And it's going to be super fun to see the surprise on all their faces when we turn around and let them know that IOG, the Cardano Foundation, and Emergo have all burned their keys, and we are now, without question, the most decentralized blockchain ecosystem in the entire world. I hope you've had a great past month. I hope you had a good weekend. You're looking forward to a great week, and I'll talk to you soon.